This is the Prestigious Initiative. Welcome. I'm Chris Bean. Here with me today, we have Mr. Jim Marshall. Jim Marshall is the discoverer of Septemics, a hitherto unknown natural phenomenon that greatly aids in the understanding of people. And today, we're going to go through some of that text with him. Jim, how are you?
Happy to see you, Chris.
All right, let me get the scales up for today, and then we can jump right in. All right, here we go.
Okay, well, this is the scale of sexuality. This is a spiral scale, meaning there is an apparent congruence between levels 1 and 7. Level 1 is no sex, and level 7 is no sex. But at level 1, it's no need for sex. And at level 7, it's no desire for sex. These are very different things. You want to make sure not to mix these up. But as with all spiral scales, there is some risk, if you don't pay close attention, that you might confuse level 1 with level 7, or vice versa. Now, this is a quantum scale, meaning you do not move gradually from level to level. You're at a certain level, and then a billionth of a second later, if you move, you're at another level. You're either at the one above it or the one below it. And it's a general scale, meaning a person has one level on this scale, that's it. Once you find your level or another person's level with the scale, you're done. Then you can focus on moving up a level, but it's not context driven, as is the case with the specific scales. Now, as with many of the scales, we have the dividing line at level 4. Level 4 is sort of a fulcrum, the point of no return, as it were, between 1 and 7. And it is, in many cases, a dividing line. In this case, as in many cases, it's the dividing line between sane and insane behavior. So sexual behavior at levels 5, 6, and 7 is insane, more so as you go further down. And at 1, 2, and 3, it's sane, more so as you go up. 4 is neutral, as is usually the case. It's not really sane or insane. It's just sort of what people expect. It's normal. So let's start at the bottom. So no desire for sex. So this is a person who's so far down in this area that he doesn't have a sex drive. As I have said before, people, to the extent that they have difficulty understanding levels, will have most difficulty understanding the extremes, meaning 1 and 7. So a lot of people say, I don't see how this can be. And there are people who, like people who are mentally ill, like maybe in an insane asylum, who have no desire for sex. They're below it. It's over their heads. Now, up from that is perversion. So if this person has some kind of therapy that moves him up a level, he will then become perverted. Now, this is a large umbrella term, perversion. There is a vast array of behaviors that fits in this level, and I'm not going to discuss any of them because all of my interviews are G-rated. So I'll just let you fill in that blank yourself with the innumerable ways that perversion occurs. Of course, there's a lot more of it going around now than there was 50 years ago in the United States, but there's never been a shortage. So up from that, we have cannot have sex. So the pervert, if he has therapy, he will come up to cannot have sex. Now, that's not the same as no desire for sex. He has a desire for it, but he can't have it. So this would be like a very inhibited person. So just can't bring himself to do it. It's beyond his ability. And again, it's not obvious that these levels will be in this order, but trust me, they are, because I've worked with a lot of people, and this is how they improve. So to not have sex is a little daffy, not as daffy as perversion, and that's not as daffy as no desire for sex. And F4, we get what you might call the normal person can have sex. This person can have sex. So if the opportunity presents itself, the person can do it. Then we got up into a conspicuously sane level, which is sex with devotion. Well, there have been more books and movies and poems created on this subject than any other single subject. This is not necessarily being married, although it tends to lead to that, but it's a kind of a falling in love type of sex. So you're devoted to the person. And up from that, you get a level that most people never attain, and most people have no reality on, which is take it or leave it. This is the person whose attitude about sex is, I can take it or leave it. Meaning, if it's a guy and the girl says yes, that's good. And if she says no, that's good too. He's fine either way. He can take it or leave it. So this guy has no particular compulsion. In other words, he can do it. And if he doesn't do it, that's okay too. That's a very liberating level that most people never attain. And at the top of the scale is no need for sex. So you see this in gurus and priests and monks and people like that, people who are above sex. For example, it's well known that Gandhi, for example, he had a wife and he sort of aspired to this level, and eventually he got there, and that was it. He had no need for sex, so that was the end of it. So that's a person who, this is beyond take it or leave it. This is there's just no need for it. Why would I want to do that? Is that person's attitude. So that's what this is about. And this is really important because you need to know where you are. And if you are not compatible with your partner on this scale, the relationship will necessarily fail. Now, I'm not saying you have to be at the same level, but you have to be at a compatible level. For example, if one person is at 3 and the other person is at 4, that can work. Or if one person is at 4 and the other person is 2, that could work. But I'll tell you what's not going to work. One person is at 4 and one person is at 5. On its face, that can't work. So this is something you want to pay attention to. You sort of want to find out, where is your partner on this spectrum? Now, if a person's at 6, that's in any scale, that's near the bottom of the scale. And that's usually a person you want to stay away from. So that's my caveat. Any questions?
No questions. Very good. Thank you.
Okay. And the scale of politics. Interestingly, these last 2 scales just randomly turned out to be subjects that I don't discuss because they're in polite company. You don't discuss sex, politics, or religion, or at least that's what I was taught, and I found it a very wise teaching. So the scale of politics. Now, this is a very unusual scale because everybody enters this scale at level 4. This is one of several scales in which the entrance point is always 4. So if a person comes to a political scene, he enters as a centrist, meaning he's neutral. He's not political. He's apolitical. And then as the person finds out about this context, he tends to move up or down. Now, if you look at this, you can see that the top and the bottom are sort of mirror images. So, for example, if a person is a Democrat, right? He starts as a centrist, and then he gravitates towards the Democrats. Well, then he'll move to level 3. He becomes a moderate Democrat. See? And then if he gets further into it, then he'll become a partisan Democrat. And if he gets further into it, he becomes a radical Democrat. Now, to him, the Republicans are the enemy. They are at the bottom of the scale. So, for example, William F. Buckley, may he rest in peace, was a partisan protagonist. He was an authentic Republican. He was not a radical. He famously drove some of the radical elements out of the party through his publication. So he would see himself at level 2. Now, to a Democrat, William F. Buckley would be at level 6, a partisan antagonist. So he's to a Democrat, Buckley would have been an authentic Republican, but he would have been viewed at level 6. But his friend Ronald Reagan viewed him at level 2. Reagan was also a partisan protagonist of the Republican persuasion. Now, other famous persons, for example, John McCain, he was a moderate. So to Republicans, he was at level 3, a tepid Republican. To the Democrats, he was at level 5. He was not a moderate protagonist. He was a moderate antagonist. So he was tepid, but he was at the other side. So this is all about how you view this. Now, the important point that I make, the most important point, is that the extremists are people at level 1 and 7. And they are the ones who cause most of the trouble. These are people who, rule of thumb for the level 1 and 7 is these people will commit crimes to pursue their agenda. So, for example, a terrorist is either at 1 or 7. If you are in favor of the terrorist, you view him as a radical protagonist. And if you are opposed to him, you view him as a radical antagonist. So if you're in Ireland and yet you have the Irish Republican Army, which committed terrorist acts against the English for many decades, if you are pro-IRA, you see the members of the IRA, who were extremists at level 1. You see them as radical protagonists. The English, of course, saw those people as radical antagonists. My advice to you is to stay away from people at level 1 and 7. They will get you in trouble. Because no matter what side you're on, somebody is going to come after you if you are an extremist. So legitimate political discourse occurs mostly at 2 through 6. Now, the truth is, there are very few centrists. Most of the people who are centrists are actually people who don't have a clue. So you have a guy, for example, if you drop me in the middle of some country I know nothing about, let's say some African country, I've never been there, I didn't know anything about the political parties. When I show up at the airport, I'm a centrist. I'm neutral. I don't know who represents what in what party. I don't even know the names of the parties. Now, if I stay there for a while, I'll probably move to 3 or 5, depending on your point of view. So if you are in party A, and I tend to then favor party A, you would consider me to be at level 3. I would be a moderate protagonist. And many of the people who are labeled centrists are actually moderates. You'll see these terms thrown around and thrown around incorrectly relative to this scale. So usually a centrist is a person who doesn't have a clue. Like you have a 3-year-old kid. He has no idea what's going on with politics. He doesn't even know there is such a thing as politics. So if a dad goes to, let's say, a Trump rally and he brings his 3-year-old kid, the kid doesn't know what's going on. He has no idea who Trump is. So the kid is a centrist. Now, dad will talk to him. The kid will say, Daddy, who's that man up there with the orange hair? And daddy will say, that's Trump. See? So the kid will start to say, well, who is he? You see? And dad will say, well, he is going to make America great. So the kid thinks, oh, this is good. See? And now he's moving up to level 3. So if the kid his parents are Democrats, and he says, who's this guy with the orange hair? They're going to say, he is a bad person who should be in prison. See? And then he, relative to Trump, he would be at level 5. Any questions?
No questions. I got to say, I like the mirrored image, the mirrored versions of this scale, which is unique, but I really like how that plays off of each other.
Right. So to a person like myself who doesn't discuss politics, who doesn't get involved in the fray, this is how it looks.
Very good.
So, for example, when William F. Buckley, for 30 years, had a show called Firing Line, and he would bring people on his show who were, so far as I know, always on the other side, meaning he was a conservative, and he would bring on people who were, let me correct myself. There were times when he brought people on his own side, but that was rare. Usually it was somebody who was an antagonist to him. So, for example, he had Noam Chomsky. Well, Noam Chomsky, relative to William F. Buckley, is at level 6. Now, Chomsky would see Buckley at level 6. See, a Republican would see Buckley at 2 and Chomsky at 6. Now, so I, as a polymathic scholar, watched that discussion between them, you see, as sort of a remote observer to see what their arguments are, how they articulate them, and so forth. So that is the view that a judge should have. A judge is supposed to be neutral. He's supposed to be a centrist. And he's got the defense and the prosecution. And he's supposed to see them the way this scale is. He's not supposed to favor either side. And he's supposed to rule in an objective way on the various objections that are raised and make the calls that need to be made, make the judgments. Should we allow this evidence in or not? He's supposed to be neutral and say, well, no, and here's why. So that's sort of the way I view things. Now, this is a spiral scale, of course, because this is the most obvious spiral scale there is. Because whether you're at 1 or 7 is entirely on which end of the spectrum you are. So this is not a situation where there is a danger of confusing one with 7, which is usually the case in the spiral scale. This is a case where, as you said, it's a mirror image. And so it depends on your point of view. And it's a gradual scale, meaning you move from one level to the next gradually. There's an infinitude of gradations. And it's a specific scale, meaning this can work in many contexts. So, for example, if you go back to the history of Europe, where you had the Protestant Reformation started by Martin Luther, there were bloody, brutal wars fought between Protestants and Catholics for hundreds of years. The 30 Years' War was between the Protestants and the Catholics. And the reason it was 30 years long is at the end of 30 years, both sides were thoroughly exhausted. They had no more weaponry, they had no more money, they had no more soldiers, and the war just ended because they had beaten one another to a pulp. That's why it ended after 30 years. So that was obviously political. So to the Protestant extremist who wants to kill all the Catholics, he's at level 1. The Catholic would view him at level 7. He'd say he's a radical antagonist. He'd say he's an extremist, you see. But meanwhile, the Catholic who wants to kill all the Protestants, to the Catholics, he's at level 1. So this becomes a question of whose ox is being gored. But then separately, I mean, that's one context. You could have a completely separate context aside from the conflict between the Catholics and the Protestants that went on for hundreds of years. At the same time, you have the Tories and Labour in England. They're political parties. So in England, you had Catholics and Protestants. So you see, you could be at one level in one political struggle and another level on another political struggle. So this even can take comic dimensions. For example, the Yankees and the Red Sox were baseball teams who were rivals for many decades. There were actually fistfights between Red Sox fans and Yankee fans. Those people were extremists. So you see, you would have a Yankee fan who's a radical protagonist extremist. The Yankees are great, and if you don't like them, you're stupid. See, that's an extreme position. And to him, the Red Sox fan who says the same thing about the Red Sox is at level 7. To the Red Sox fan, he's at level 1, and the Yankee is down at level 7. So this is specific. There are a variety of contexts, and politics exists in many forms. We tend to think of it in only one way, but there are many historical, political divides. The word politics comes from the word pole. So you have a pole. So level 1 is one pole, and level 7 is the opposite pole, just as in geography. And that's why it's called politics. Any questions?
No questions. Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Now, since we're done with our scales now, we've went through all of that information. Do you have any closing remarks to share on the topic of septemics?
Yes, I'd like to discuss the axioms of septemics.
Very good.
Okay, well, an axiom is a self-evident truth. It's you could say axiom is a synonym of postulate. You just decide this is true and proceed from there. Or looking at it from another way, it's something that it's so fundamentally true that within that context, there's no arguing with it. So there are basic truths of septemics, and that's what these axioms are. There are 12 of them, so I'll go through them. So axiom number 1 is septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to human beings occur in a sequence of 7 levels. So that is a basic working definition as to what it is. Now, it's when you discuss it, it seems more like you're discussing philosophy, but it's a science in the sense that septemics was empirically derived. So there never was a theory of septemics. This is just observational data that the founder came upon and codified. So, and what happened is, as I found this data, I tested it in my sessions with my clients. I tested it by observation. In other words, I would see the client as being at a certain level on a certain scale that I had previously observed. And then I would predict that as a result of the session, the client would go up to the next level on that scale. And that's what would happen, thus verifying my hypothesis. And so this happened thousands and thousands of times. So it took many decades for me to take this data that I had simply observed and start to view it as a science, because it had been redundantly verified. And then, of course, when I would take it out of the session and go into the world, I would just see it all around me. It's just everywhere I look. I'd look at a guy, oh, that guy's at that level on the scale of choice. Oh, that guy's at that level on the scale of motivation. I mean, it's as obvious as walking down the street and saying, oh, there's an oak tree. So that's axiom 1. Axiom 2. Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. Now, 2 is very close to 1. You could say it's a restatement of 1. But it's a little bit more about the mechanics of it, how it functions. So we have these scales or sequences, or you can call them hierarchies, if you wish, and it's always 7, and it's always and enables you to analyze human phenomena. So this is very similar to when Isaac Newton put a beam of white light through a prism and he saw a rainbow coming out on the other side. White light is composed of 7 colors. And because you put it through a prism, each part, the ray gets spread out by the prism. And there we get Roy G. Biv, colors of the rainbow. So this is exactly what happened to me, but it was with human phenomena rather than physical phenomena. Okay, so let's go to number 3. Axiom number 3 is septemics is based entirely on natural phenomena and empirical observation. This is important to understand. This is a descriptive science, meaning it's like botany or astronomy or zoology. You see what's there and you analyze it and you break it down into a way that people can work with it. For example, if you know a little bit about botany, the rose is in the same family with the apple. That is not obvious. Most people do not know that. Most people would categorize a rose as being more like a tulip. But once you realize genetically a rose is much closer to an apple, I would categorize it that way, which is how they do it botanically. a tulip grows from a bulb. It's completely different. Its genetics are completely different. So that is how botany works. Okay, you observe these phenomena and you categorize them, and that is useful information. Where for example, you can say, well, a coyote is kind of in a family with the dog. So, except in Septemics, it's about human phenomena. It's not plants or animals or stars. So it's important to understand that I am a dyed-in-the-wool engineer, and I would not have written this book if this were not based entirely on natural phenomena and empirical observation. None of this is my opinion, and none of these scales are the way I want them to be. It's just the way they are. It's like, the acceleration of gravity at the surface of the Earth is 10 meters per second per second. That has nothing to do with what I want. Would I like it to be more or less? Well, who cares what I want? That's what it is. Anybody can calculate it. And that's how Septemics came about. I saw these data. I made these empirical observations of natural phenomena, and I just wrote them down. And then the trick was writing it in a way that would make sense to people so that they could read the book and say, oh, yeah, I get this. This is useful. This is why my mother and father hate one another. He's at this level and she's at this level. Okay, so now we're going to go to 4. Axiom 4 states, being at or near the top of any septemic scale is both a cause and effect of being at or near the top of any other septemic scale. And being at or near the bottom of any septemic scale is both a cause and effect of being at or near the top, this is written wrongly, is both a cause and effect of being at or near the bottom of any other septemic scale. So this is something that I just observed after watching this for many years. So, for example, if a person goes up a level on one scale, that tends to make it easier for him to go up a level on another scale. So this is a little bit wieldy, but there's no other way to say this. So I'll say it again. Being at or near the top of any septemic scale is both a cause and effect of being at or near the top of any other septemic scale. And being at or near the bottom of any septemic scale is both a cause and effect of being at or near the bottom of any other septemic scale. Any questions about any of this?
No questions.
Okay.
All very clear and makes perfect sense.
Right. Now, axiom 5. In moving from one septemic scale to another level, I misread this. In moving from one septemic level to another level, on any septemic scale, one can only move to an adjacent level. It is impossible to skip a level. And the way I generally explain this is, if you're at the first floor and you want to go to the 5th floor, one way or another, you're going to have to go through the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th. Whether you take the stairs, the elevator, the escalator, or go outside the building and climb up with a rope ladder. So, again, this is something that I just observed, that I've been observing for many decades. I have never seen anybody change levels skipping a level. Now, sometimes you go through a level quickly enough, or easily enough, or obtusely enough that you don't realize you went through a level. That happens. That just means the person was not aware of it. Some of these scales are more volatile than others. For example, the scale of evaluation is an extremely volatile scale. People often move through those levels in a matter of minutes. So Say you go to a political rally and there's a guy who's running for office and he gets up there and he starts to talk. Well, when you come in the room, you're at a certain level on the scale of evaluation. And as he talks, he's winning you over and you're moving up that scale. And by the time you leave, let's say you've moved up from level 4 up to level 2. You see, you might not be aware of that. And this could happen quite quickly. It doesn't mean you skipped level 3. At some point, you were at level 3. So you went from 4 to 3 to 2, whether you're aware of it or not. But this is important to know because much of the utility of this subject comes from this axiom. Because these are the gradients that enable you to succeed. In other words, this material facilitates success by telling you that success means moving from the level you're at to the next level up. And it also tells you if you fail, you're going to the next level down. So you can watch somebody fail and you will see him go right down to the next level down. He'll be at a certain level and you see this guy's not getting anywhere. He doesn't know what he's doing. And 2 weeks later, he's down at the next lower level. You knew this was going to happen because it's the next level down. So this makes it very useful because when you find your level, you then target yourself for the next level up. Or if you're helping someone else, you help that person find that level, and then you help that person move one level. Most people have difficulty resolving a problem, situation, or dilemma because they don't know the gradient, meaning they don't know what to do next. So this is why, as I often say, crash diets and crash exercise programs don't work. So when you hire a dietitian or a trainer, he knows the gradients and he's moving you up to the next level up. Or if you take a course, that teacher is supposed to be an expert in teaching this subject. When you come in, you are at a lower level and he moves you up to the next level up. And I worked extensively as a tutor for many decades. This was what I did. I would find the level the person was at, and then I would move the person up to the next higher level. So it's a little bit like detective work in the sense that I would sort of have to figure out what this guy knows, what this guy doesn't know. Because I can assure you, the person never knows what he doesn't know. If he knew what he didn't know, he would know it. So you don't ask the guy, do you understand this? He's not going to give you a straight answer. You have to say, okay, I would like you to factor this polynomial. Now, if he does it right, that tells you he knows how to do it. You don't say to him, do you know how to factor polynomial? Now, if he does, he'll say yes, and then he'll be able to do it. But very often you'll get a guy say yes, and then he still can't do it because he doesn't know that he doesn't know. So that is how this subject is useful to you. Each of these scales is a roadmap for success because if you correctly find the level that you or another person is at, you can then move yourself or the other person up to the next level. And if a person is, for example, at level 5, and he tries to move to level 1, 2, or 3, he will necessarily fail. It is not the next thing up. You have to get him to focus on moving from 5 to 4, and he will be able to do that. And that is a corollary of the ancient datum in engineering that 90% of finding the right answer is asking the right question. Because when you know what level you are at, in a sense, targeting that next level up is asking the right question. So it's like, what do I do now? You see, when you ask the right question, you get an answer that tells you what to do now. And that's how you resolve the problem. That is what troubleshooters do. They come into a situation and they ask the right question. So, say you have an electronic device that's not working, you start asking questions. Now, usually you ask these questions by running tests. You hook the device or components of the device up to a meter, and you get a reading. That answers a question. This resistor is not working. Well, let's replace that resistor with one that works, you see? So the solution is facilitated by getting the right answer. So that is how this subject works. So I did the heavy lifting by figuring out the 7 levels across 35 axes, and I'm giving it to people. So next, axiom 6. Whenever one correctly identifies someone as being at a particular level on any septemic scale, one has a consequent realization and is pleased with the result. This is one of the ways that you know you found the right level. So a guy looks at a particular scale, and when he sees he's at, oh, I see him at level 5. That in itself is kind of a realization. See, just realize, oh, I'm at level 5. See, he's going to be pleased with that because it's the truth. But usually there's something bigger than that. Usually say, oh, that explains it. That explains why I can't get along with Mildred. I'm at 5, she's at 3. No wonder we can't get along. So you see, he, as I often point out, he's not going to be unhappy because he's at level 5, which is a low level. He's going to be pleased because he found the solution. So don't think that finding that you're at a low level is going to make you unhappy. Now, I'm not saying you should tell people. You might not want to tell people what level you're at or what level another person is at, which is why I always say, never tell anyone any person's level on any scale. Or let me put it this way, never give the septemic level of any living person to anyone. Now, if you want to find the level of a deceased person, that's okay. Because you're not messing in that person's life. The person doesn't have a life anymore. So in the book, I, for illustrative purposes, give the levels of many famous people. Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Napoleon, and so forth. So people can study history and say, oh, I see how this guy is at this level. So it helps you to understand what the level is about because I'm putting an actual person to it. But even somebody who is at a very low level, for example, I often give the level of Adolf Hitler on the scale of basic purposes. Now, he's at level 7, where he was. There are other people I know who are at level 7, and I'm not telling you who they are because they're still alive. And that's okay because this is not hard to figure out. You just look at the scale and look at the person. Look at the scale, look at the person. It's there. People tell you their levels. It comes right out of them. If you listen to Joe Biden, pay attention to what he says. He tells you his level on these various scales. I'm not going to tell you what they are because that's not my place. You can figure it out yourself. Pay attention. Shut up and listen. And the person will tell you his level. And it's a little bit like, the old thing about giving someone enough rope to hang himself. Well, every person already has enough rope to hang himself, so to speak. So if you just listen to somebody, he will tell you his level. Body language has something to do with it, choices they make in their lives. But at some point, it clicks. You say, I see. This guy's at this level. For example, let's say you have someone who is an enthusiast of Mussolini. That means on the scale of choice, he is at level 5, period. This person wants somebody else to make a choice for him. So, forget about mentioning any names, but you can see this. And you can actually coax this out of a person. You can say, you mean you're okay with having somebody in Washington tell you what appliances you can buy and which ones you can't? I'll say, yes, I'm okay with that. See, he tells you where he is on the scale of choice. It's clear. So let's move on. Every action 7, every Septemic scale is unique and exists independently of any other Septemic scale. All of these scales were discovered separately. In other words, the observations that were made were not relative to other scales. They were just directly made. It's like a miner. He goes out, he digs in the ground, he says, there's silver here. See, he found it. He might not even have been looking for silver. He might have been looking for gold. And by the way, if you don't know about mining, that's what usually happens. There are very few mines that only give one product. If a guy has a gold mine, I guarantee you that mine is also producing silver, copper, all kinds of things. Cobalt, because that's how these things exist in nature. So you dig and you say, this is a silver mine, but look at all this copper we're finding here. Okay, we can sell that too. So you have to realize that every scale is unique, and that's important because you cannot learn anything about scale A from studying scale B. That is a complete waste of time. You have to study them separately, and you have to calculate the person's level in each scale separately because it's a unique scale. And the more you study the scales, you will see that they are unique, even though there are similarities. In other words, all of the scales are either general or specific. Right? So you have a large group of scales that are specific scales. Okay, so that's a similarity. But still, even within that, amongst those specific scales, each of those is unique for some other reason. So that's important to know when you work with the material. Action 8. Every Septemic scale has an inherently mathematical structure. Now, this is how I figured this to be a separate subject. Because when I saw the first Septemic scale that I discovered was inherently mathematical, I said, I don't know what this is, but it has to be natural law. So if you study it, you'll see the mathematics in it. Now, I went out of my way to make it as unmathematical as possible because most people are allergic to mathematics. Now, the people who are not allergic to mathematics will see it in there. But there are a variety of ways. For example, the fact that it's 7. And there's a whole section in the introduction called Why 7? And it's a mathematical explanation. There's a mathematical reason why we have 7 days of the week and why we see the spectrum. An example I give, we talk about red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, Roy G. Biv, that's the spectrum. Well, to tell you the truth, that's arbitrary because we could have another color between red and orange and call it tangerine and say they're hate. So why seven? Well, read it in the book. It tells you why seven. So just the fact that there's seven is inherently mathematical, but there are all kinds of other structures which you can see. For example, we just talked about the scale of politics, which has a mirror image, which itself has a mathematical dimension to it. And the fact that seven of the scales have a plus minus, meaning inflow, outflow, or if you prefer, reach, withdraw. So it goes plus minus, plus minus, plus minus. That is mathematical. So the math is in there, but it's different for every scale. Axiom 9. When a person is at or near the top of any septemic scale, it is because that person is insightful in that area. When a person is at or near the bottom of any septemic scale, it is because that person lacks insight in that area. That tells you that this is all about insight. This is very important for several reasons. What is education? Education comes from the Latin verb educare, which means to lead out. True education, you're leading the person out. You're giving him insight. This is the difference between education and job training, or education and indoctrination. So, for example, if you're in an English class and you are studying The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, which is a very lengthy novel, if you have a good teacher, you will have insight. Oh, I see. That's why this section of the book is in French and the rest of it's in German. You see, there's an insight there. So that is why this is useful to you, because it will cause you to have insights. Now, this also tells you that when a person is at or near the bottom of any scale, he will have trouble using that scale because he lacks insight in that area. Now, someone who is a generally uninsightful person is going to be a professional criminal, a homeless person, a drug addict, something like that, a war criminal. The really valuable people are the insightful people. So I find when I go on the internet, I look for the people who are insightful. So I want to listen to Jordan Peterson or Elon Musk or Peter Thiel because they are insightful. It doesn't necessarily mean I agree with everything they say. I don't. It's just that they're insightful. You get insights. Oh, I see. See, that is what makes a lecture work for you. So like when I was a teenager and I would go to, for example, a physics lecture and the teacher would explain something and I would have insights. Oh, I see. That's how this works. And that is creating insight. So this is close to the previous let me see if I can find it. Six. Six says, whenever one correctly identifies someone as being at a particular level on any septemic scale, one has a consequent realization and is pleased with the result. So you could say he has a consequent insight. But I said realization because the person will say, I just realized my girlfriend is just like my mother. That's usually how they say it. They realize, oh, I just realized that. So tell me, why are you breaking up with me, Joe? Because I realized you're a gold digger. See? So insight and realization are very close. So in this axiom, I'm explaining why is a person at the top, at or near the top of a scale? Because he's insightful in that area. So if a person is at or near the top of the scale, pay attention because he knows what he's talking about. And if a person is at or near the bottom of a scale, do not pay attention because he's a dope in that area, in that context. He lacks insight. And that person will make faulty conclusions and have wrong ideas. And this is what you get. So you get somebody who comes up with something completely crazy. And you're just wondering at it. But why would he think that? Why would he say that? What sense, like people who say, let's kill all the Jews, this is not something I'm making up. This has been going on for a long time. We just had a vicious attack 2 months ago. People went in and slaughtered, I think it was 1,400 innocent people in Israel. So that's daffy. Those people are at or near the bottom of one or more scales, guaranteed. That's why they did things like that. They lack insight. People who are insightful can look at it and say, well, maybe there are some bad Jews, but there's certainly some very good ones. I mean, if I want to learn law, I can listen to Alan Dershowitz. He knows a lot about law. You see, that's like a balanced view. That's an insightful view. As opposed to somebody like Hitler, who was at or near the bottom of many scales, who said, let's just kill them all. So that's what you're looking at when you have somebody who has these crazy ideas. And usually those ideas are destructive. Even if they're not destructive at first blush, the end result of them will be destructive. Number 10. Axiom 10 is utilization of septemics requires some insight, but also develops one's insight. So you see, 10 is related to 9. So this tells you, if you're trying to work with a person with a certain scale and he's having a lot of trouble, that probably means that person is at or near the bottom of the scale. Because the reason he's having trouble is he lacks insight in that area. He may not lack insight on the next scale. So you might have a guy who's brilliant in his profession. Maybe he has a doctorate in economics and knows what he's talking about. But then you look at his personal life and it's a train wreck. That's a different scale. So in his personal life, perhaps the scale of sexuality, perhaps the scale of relationships, he's at or near the bottom. So if you're working with somebody and trying to help them with this, realize if the person is insightful, that's a clue that he is pretty far up the scale. And if he can't get it at all, I can't do this, it doesn't make any sense to me, I don't know, that tells you that that person is at or near the bottom of the scale. So it sort of guides you into where to look. So let's say you're trying to get a guy to find where he is on the scale of motivation relative to his spouse, right? He looks at this, he says, I don't know, I can't figure this out. This doesn't make any sense. I would direct his attention to the bottom of the scale. I would say, well, take a look at level 5. Does that seem to make any sense to you in the context of your relationship with your wife? Well, I don't know, maybe. Okay, well, look at level 6. You see, so you're sort of guiding him in the direction that we already know he's in because he lacks insight in the area. So that's how you use this to help people. Because you could waste a lot of time trying to get somebody to look at an area of the scale that doesn't apply to him. Like someone who's fairly high on the scale of sexuality, you look at 6 and 7 and say, this has got nothing to do with me. He knows right away. See, he's giving you an insight. So that tells you that right away, well, yeah, that's right. He's somewhat up there. See, you don't even mess with 6 and 7. Just forget about them and focus on the upper ones. So I would say, well, which ones of these do make sense to you? You see? And then he'll start to narrow it down. Okay, so 11. Action 11. Any human problem, difficulty, dilemma, or situation can successfully be analyzed by one or more septemic scales, usually more than one scale. Now, this is something that, if you're new to the subject, this is not apparent, but I'm telling you, it's axiomatic. That's why this is an axiom. Now, when we talk about human problems, human difficulties, human dilemmas, we're not talking about fixing your car. That's a mechanical problem. We're not talking about fixing a broken leg. That's a medical problem. We're not talking about figuring out which groceries you should buy because you only have $10. See, that's a financial issue. We're talking about human problems. Why can't I get along with my mother? Do I really want to date this guy? That's a human problem. Or if you look at a society like the United States and you assess it against the scale of civilization, see, is this a healthy society? How does it match up against the scale of civilization? So it's important to realize that this axiom is true because it tells you no matter what problem, difficulty, dilemma, situation, or whatever else you want to call it, you have, this book will help you. Because there are 35 scales. One or more of those scales is going to be relevant. Now, how insightful you are will facilitate the usage of it. So if you have a guy who's not very insightful, he might have trouble figuring out which scale to use. So you can help him because you can be more insightful. For example, the guy is having this relationship problem, right? He's not getting along with his girlfriend. It's a big Megillah. And so you want to help him. So you already know that that relationship is somewhere on this scale of relationships. So now you get him to look at it, and he might have difficulty grasping it because it's at or near the bottom of the scale. See, he's living at or near the bottom of the scale. That's why this relationship is a mess. So as a septemicist, you can sort of guide the person because you know, K-N-O-W, axiomatically you know that one or more of these scales is going to help to resolve the situation. I use the word analyze because it's really what you're doing. You're analyzing the situation. So a person has a dilemma. Like, for example, the guy's having trouble with his business. He's losing money. There are several scales that are right on point for that. So you come in and you help him to analyze this. Look at the scale of management, these 7 functions that must exist in order to successfully manage anything. See? And he'll say, oh, 7 functions in order to manage. I didn't know that. See? And so now you can get him to an insight. He says, oh, I don't even have level 5 in my business. Well, that might be why the business is failing. It might not be the only thing, but just the fact that he looks at it and sees that, he's analyzing it. And that is what this is about. It's about analysis of human affairs. And once you analyze it, then you can predict what's going to happen because you've analyzed it. And if you can predict it, then you can manage it. So a good manager of anything is the person who can predict that area. So, for example, you have a person who's a chef. He knows if you put this sauce on a high heat, it will burn the sauce. He has to turn the gas down to a low level and let it cook slowly. You see, he has insight into this. He can predict what's going to happen. Now, some guy who doesn't know that will say, well, let's just crank up the heat and do this faster. Doesn't work. You burn the sauce. So the person who has insight is the person who analyzes it. He understands that what works and what doesn't work. So in his mind, it's analyzed. So like a guy who comes over to fix your refrigerator stops working. He's a refrigeration repairman. He knows all about refrigerators. He looks at your refrigerator and says, need a compressor. What's in a new compressor? Fixed. See, he analyzed it. That might have taken him a few minutes. And then he can predict what's going to happen. You swap out the compressor for a new one, and it's going to work. So he can successfully manage refrigeration. So that is what this subject is about. But until you can have a personal reality on this, rely on axiom 11. Any human problem, difficulty, dilemma, or situation can successfully be analyzed on one or more of these Septemic scales, usually more than one. I've been working with this material for most of my life. And as you can see, I'm not a kid. So I've been watching this work for a long time. Even before I had the idea of Septemics, I was seeing these patterns and using them to analyze situations. Like what is now called the scale of basic purposes. I had that scale in a lesser form when I was a young man. And I would look at people and say, well, this guy's at this level. Oh, I'm going to stay away from him. Or the opposite. This guy's up at this level. Yeah, let's get him. So rely on axiom 11. Don't think there is a human problem, difficulty, dilemma, or situation that cannot be successfully analyzed on one or more of these scales. You are wrong if you think that. That's as wrong as thinking that 2 + 2 = 5. It's just wrong. That is the whole point of axioms. You have these basic data. That is what science is about. Science is about establishing these data. Like, for example, Ohm's law. Everybody in physics knows Ohm's law. You rely on it. You plug in the data, you make the calculation. Oh, okay, yeah, it's 23. You don't say, gee, I wonder if Ohm's law is true. That is why you go to school to learn what works. Axiom 12. Septemics is for the use of those who wish to improve oneself and others. Now, don't think that everyone wishes to improve oneself or others. That is not true. About half of humanity wishes to improve oneself or others. People who do not wish to improve oneself or others are not going to be interested in this, are not going to understand it, are not going to want to study it, and are probably going to oppose it. Because let's say you have some guy who is a serial adulterer, right? He cheats on his wife and he goes around with all these other women, right? So this guy is at or near the bottom of the scale of sexuality. He's nowhere near level 3, which is sex with devotion. So that guy is not going to want people to learn this skill. His wife will get a hold of that scale and say, this guy's way down there, and call a divorce lawyer. I'm out of here. See, this guy's a serial adulterer. We're done. But until she has the scale, she might not analyze that. She might not be insightful enough to figure out what's going on. So this is why you have people who stay in abusive relationships. Right? The guy gets drunk, he beats up his wife. He says, I'm sorry the next day. 2 weeks later, he gets drunk, he beats up his wife. The next day, he says, I'm sorry. And this woman puts up with this. If she got out this book and find where this guy was on 6 or 8 or 10 scales, she would find that this guy is at or near the bottom of several scales. What's this guy's motivation? What's this guy's way of choosing? See, where is this guy on the scale of attack? See, must attack is a low level. So when you find somebody who is at or near the bottom of a scale, stand back, put on rubber gloves and goggles, because it's going to be a mess. So now, unfortunately, policemen and military people have to deal with these people. They have to arrest these psychopathic criminals. So that's the people they deal with are not people who are potential septemicists. They're not going to want to use it. They're not going to use it. You can't take some guy who's doing 25 years in Alcatraz for armed robbery of a bank and give him this book and expect him to get it. Now, he might get bits and pieces of it. On the other hand, if you have some kid who's a normal kid and he's having trouble with school, you can get him to look at the scale of scholarship and he'll say, oh, yeah, I see. Yeah, I'm a scholar. I fit on this scale. See? And he'll get it and he'll use it because he wants to improve himself. So it's important to realize that this subject will not be attractive to everybody, only to about half of the population. So people who are terrorists, serial murderers, professional criminals, corrupt politicians, et cetera, drug addicts, most of those people are not going to get this because they lack insight. That is why they're in those categories. So that's why you'll have some college kid, and he smokes pot. He says, this is not helping me. This is stupid. I'm not going to do this anymore. So he had a little bit of insight there. He was sort of smart enough to realize that this was not getting him where he wanted to go. You see? So he stops doing it. So there's some insight there, as opposed to some other guy who just keeps doing it. And it's a proven scientific fact that it damages your brain. All drugs that affect your cognition damage your brain. I have discussed this with professionals. I have seen the radiological images of the brains of drug users. It's a scary thing. Pieces of their brains are missing. So that guy who says, I'm not going to do this. Yeah, I did it. It was fun. I'm not doing this anymore. I want to study. See, that guy will like Septemics. The other guy who just smokes pot every chance he gets, he's probably not going to be interested in Septemics. This is a guy who lacks insight. That's why he's destroying himself. And it doesn't matter whether it's drugs or alcohol or anything else. There's all kinds of ways that people destroy themselves. People who are destroying themselves, obviously, that's the opposite of improving oneself. So you have a guy who's, let's say he's 300 pounds overweight. Is this a guy who wishes to improve himself? Because when he got to, say, 100 pounds overweight, he could have gone to Jenny Craig. He could have gone to Weight Watchers. He could have joined the gym. He could have hired me to train him. I've worked as a professional trainer. If you come to me when you're 100 pounds overweight, yes, that's a big barrier. But the guy who's 300 pounds overweight, he should have gotten help 20 years earlier. So he's obviously not interested in improving. He'll complain about it, but he still eats 6 pizzas. So I'm telling you who the subject is for. And that's important for you to know. Because I don't want you wasting your time using this on some gang member who's also a drug user. Okay? That guy is not interested in improving himself. And he's not interested in improving others, or he wouldn't be a gang member. He wouldn't be stealing cars. That's the opposite of improving people. Somebody who wants to improve people, he wouldn't steal your car. He'd say, hey, you can get a better car than this for the same price over there at Smith Ford. See, he's helping the guy. He's helping him to improve himself. That's the exact opposite of the guy who steals your car. He's not helping you, he's hindering you. So this sort of tells you who your public is. So Septemics, like many subjects, is sort of embraced, excuse me, by a certain population. So, for example, if you find people who are math majors, it's a certain population who are math majors. They have a lot in common. They think a certain way. You know a lot about this guy because he's a math major. So when I talk to people, I want to know, oh, what is your degree in? Oh, I have a Juris Doctor. Oh, see, this guy knows all about the law. Great, let's talk about the law. So I'm not going to talk to this guy about the theory of relativity because he's not going to know what the hell I'm talking about. So it's the same thing with Septemics. You want to use it on people who are going to use it. So you don't want to, if you have a guy, and I'll give you an example, Jackie Gleason. Jackie Gleason was a chain smoker. He was a glutton. He was a heavy drinker. I don't know if he was an alcoholic, but he was a heavy drinker. And he was a serial adulterer. Okay? It's not somebody who's really in the likely population for Septemics. Now, it's true that his weight did go up and down. So that's kind of saying, okay, well, yeah, I've hit 100 pounds over. I better do something about this. So that's kind of going in the other direction. Say, well, maybe he had some interest in improving himself. You see, but there are telltale signs. I mean, if you want to sell Septemics books, don't go to the Russian mob. They're not going to buy them. Now, if you go to, for example, the Society of Jesus, who are not only very ethical people, but very well-educated people. Now, there are people who will be interested in this. They'll say, really, is a whole new subject, huh? Okay, yeah, I'll buy the book, see? And they'll read it and they'll get it because they're upscale people. I studied with them for 4 years. I know who they are. They're very upscale people. Now, when I say upscale, that is a septemic term. I'm saying they're at or near the top of many of the scales. And that is exactly what I found when I was around those people for 4 years. Now, this is before I even had the idea of Septemics, but I could still see they were what I now call upscale people, even though each one was unique. Just like you could look at 100 roses, they're all beautiful. Each one is unique. No rose is like any other rose. No tulip is like any other tulip. That doesn't mean you can't tell the difference between roses and tulips. So there are excellence is one thing. That doesn't mean it's standardization. That's a different thing. So, for example, every guitar player in the world plays a little different from every other guitar player in the world. And if you look at the great guitarists, it's really clear. I mean, Eddie Van Halen's playing is nothing like Eric Clapton's playing, and Clapton's playing is nothing like Al Di Meola's playing, and Al Di Meola's playing is nothing like Jeff Beck's playing. They're all upscale, but they're also all unique. So those are the actions. Any questions?
No, excuse me, no questions. Jim, I want to tell you, thank you. I have really enjoyed our time together and learning from you. And I look forward to seeing the, as Dr. Seuss says, seeing the places you go and seeing you and hearing you share these scales with us, again, has been so helpful. And again, I look forward to being able to hear great things from you.
Well, thank you. Your success is my reward.
Very good. Listeners, hey, I thank you for listening. Thank you for being on this journey here with us. And if you found this information insightful or helpful, let us know. Share it in the comments below, and we'll be sure to continue that conversation with you.
Yeah, I want to invite your listeners to my website, which is septemics.com.
Very good.
SEPTEMICS.
Wonderful.
And it is carefully constructed to tell a new person in a short period of time what this is about and how it will help you. Because you can read what many readers have said about it. You can read what many journalists have written about it. You can read the reviews. You can read sections of the book itself. And you can listen to a pre-recorded introduction to Septemics, in which I explain in a simple way to a new person what this is, how it works, and why it will help you. Thank you, Chris.
Yes, sir. Very good. And I'll be sure to leave the link to your website in the comments for the description for this episode as well.
Great.
Listeners, until next time, stay prestigious.